are talking about today love, dating, and relationships in the 21st century and what it means to be in an evolutionary relationship. Before we start, I want to introduce Patricia. Honestly, Patricia is one of the greatest spiritual teachers of our time. She's had more than 40 years experience teaching over 200,000 people worldwide. She's played a pivotal role in Werner Erhard's transformational movement, which was called EST, and now it's Landmark. She is the former host of Evolutionary Collective Conversations, where she had a following of over 700,000 people. She has done thousands of talks and workshops and retreats in places like the Integral Institute, Omega, Kripalu, and the Shift Network. She is the founder and director of the Evolutionary Collective, and she is a best-selling author of 2 books, one of which we are going to be talking about today. It's called Evolutionary Relationships, Unleashing the Power of Mutual Awakening and Opening to a New Paradigm of Human Relatedness. But I'll just start with, my first question. I am a love and relationship coach, and I meet with people who are really struggling with their relationships. And you talk about how we've done all this internal spiritual and psychological work, and yet it's not really showing up in our relationships. So what do you think is contributing to our relationships being in this kind of state of
disarray?
Confusion, upheaval, disarray is what's going on from your perspective?
Well, I mean, there's different pieces. I mean, obviously, part of the work that is important is for people to work out some of their, the childhood pattern, things that are definitely going to get in the way of being related to anyone. But for me, I think that the way you see a relationship matters as far as where to approach it from. So number one is, I don't think people look at why they want to be in a relationship. I talk about in the book a little bit, if you have Maslow's hierarchy, some people are in a relationship pretty, like at that very base level of it, kind of turns into logistics, it's safer to live together, they do this, you do that, they go shopping, you do, there's a kind of functionality, which is lovely to be with another person. And sometimes people don't realize that, the sex is very basic. Some of that stuff is pretty basic, but it's kind of reliable, and that's kind of what they want. Nothing wrong with that, but you ought to know that there's a lot of other stuff on the menu, that you can order. And so if you go up Maslow's hierarchy, feeling emotionally safe with each other is obviously important. Some people have a relationship that's more based in self-esteem, like you're great, I'm great, like kind of feeding each other's sense of being a man or a woman, like you're kind of in that place and feeding into like what you do. Self-actualized relationships can also be more on that success level, like you want to be with someone else and have a successful relationship and success in the world and success with your family and all that kind of stuff. So, and all of that depends on your ego development. So being a saner, more capable human being makes a difference if you want those things.
Right.
Now, that is not, my work is not about helping people there. And I think that's important. I think that there's so many relationships in the world and marriages and families that are thriving in different levels of what they want and what they see as possible. The evolutionary relationship is, particularly in a love relationship, which is what we're talking about, to do with a kind of another element. So there's this possibility of having, a barbecue and enjoying all the things that we have with each other, but that the source of the relationship is actually to be together, coming from this more spiritual dimension. That you can be with each other there's the quality of the beloved,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is mind-blowing, and a place where the divine can live in your relationship and through your relationship. It's not just like for you, it's also for, in my experience, that the mystical energies of evolution and the divine, they need people who want to play on the edge of what's possible.
So for you, you actually had this epic love. You had this
I did.
with Peter.
Yeah, I did.
And this is actually how all of this work and the collective
Came into being.
where it came to be.
You know, I had a pretty successful life before I met him, and I was teaching, you know, and was married, you know, had a more safe, lovely relationship, but it wasn't, you know, like at one point I just thought, I can't do this for another 30 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything bad, but it didn't, you know,
Yeah.
it just didn't have that magic that I felt like I needed. And I left the relationship for the possibility of something. How crazy is that?
Well, it's like you say, you had this longing, and you talk about the longing, and you can feel it when you read it.
Yeah.
You know,
I was just like,
yeah, and I think, you know, many of us can feel that reading that. But I'm wondering, you know, we're in this kind of post-digital time where we're so distracted,
right.
and we're so you know, we're getting this instant gratification from social media, and we're not really in this place.
People don't realize that they need to pay attention to it. I think more people have a longing for love, but it's like, you know, it pops in for a second, and then they go, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, like, I'm fine, he's fine, and we're fine. And, you know, like, you kind of talk yourself down. Like, it's not just a longing for love, it's a longing for God, for the divine. Like, there's something that says there's something more than just this. There's something more than just even having a fabulous trip to the Bahamas with my lover. You know, it's kind of like, even all that, as lovely as, you know, a great life can be, there's something that isn't why we're here. Do you know what I mean? We're here to love and to experience like heaven on earth in some which way, you know, through our lives and through the people that we love. And so, you know, it's possible, and it's important for as many people as possible not to compromise.
Yeah.
And it's not about the other person necessarily. It's about wanting really what's possible with love and with yourself. And the practice, as you know, because you've been participating in this.
Yes.
The practice that I developed, the mutual awakening practice, is about giving people a way to go inside that experience that Peter and I had. You can do this with someone that you're not attracted to necessarily, you know, like on the levels that Peter and I were. And you move into a place where there's so much intimacy and depth and contact, and something bigger is happening. You're just like, oh my God, you know, you just like feel. And it tickles, like it's like going like this. It's like tickling something and going, what about that? What about that? You know, like, hey, what about that? You know, like, and making open a space so that you start to go, wait a minute. You know, I have this one precious life, right? As, I can't remember the poet, but the wonderful poet that said, I have this one wild and wonderful precious life. You know, am I going to have a safe, I don't know, you know, like
secure, right, safe, kind of predictable, and knowing the person's there, and maybe there's some accountability and, you know, reliability. Right. But I think really we're in a time where, because we have done so much of this work, that we are wanting more. Yeah. We totally want more. And you talk about like the ways to get there, and the space between, and of course, being in these practices in the Evolution Collective, I feel, you know, I can feel that how that is transforming my life.
Right.
So the first that like vector or the first activating principle you call
Yeah.
it is engagement, and you
Right.
describe it as a dimension of love and a desire for you to give all of who you are. This is so beautiful. All of who you are. It's so simple, but it's gorgeous. So you talk about how our relationships exist largely in our imaginations
Yeah.
today as projections, images, fantasies, and ideas about who the other person is. And this is especially true with online dating and with how many
Yeah.
single people there are and people looking for love. You know,
Right.
you've got a lot of people who are in a relationship for a few months, and then something doesn't work
And then
out.
they see them, they go, oh, that's who that is. Right?
Yeah, or just something goes wrong, and there
Yeah.
isn't really ever a commitment. So
Mm-hmm.
they're on to the next
The
one.
next one.
Yeah,
I want
yeah,
to say something about what you brought through about engagement. So
yeah,
part of what I think is useful about like when we're like in the work that we're doing, we're giving people a chance to find the connection, to find that level of engagement. Because I always wanted to give myself totally. It must have been some like past like devotional, like the part of you that's like a mystic who wants to go, take me, take me, God, kind of thing. You want to like give yourself wholeheartedly. But I think you can't do that if the other doesn't receive you fully.
yeah.
Absolutely. If you've got someone who's going, whoa, wait a minute, so with the practice and the way that we're working, you have these safe spaces to build like that ability to like be there fully, be inside the other, give fully, receive fully, like all of that starts to wake up. So you actually have the experience without it being like, oh, then it must mean I'm in love. Like you start to feel that with many people. And then the particularity, the possibility of attracting someone who is your lover, which is a different thing.
Yes.
You kind of know you have some capacity.
But it's a beautiful and practical way of just like, as you're saying, being open and willing. So sometimes when you're dating someone, one person's willing, but the other person may not be. But
Right.
when you're in this practice, you are there saying, I'm here,
Yeah.
I'm open, and I'm willing to
Right.
engage.
Right.
So that right there is such a great place to start. So it's like we should all be mapping on our dates.
Yeah, but I know the space of this to develop the capacity for it.
Right.
See, otherwise, if you go out there, everyone's separate.
Yes.
So I actually have the key to bringing people into oneness reliably. Like that thing where you fall into each other and you're like, oh my God, and you're like somewhere together. We know how to do that.
Yes.
And we know how to do that every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
And as you say, we're doing it not from our ego. We're doing it from this place, like you call it, the point of origin. It's funny because I went to the Y today to exercise, which I go all the time, and I've gone for months and years. But today I said, I'm going to go and be in my point of origin today. And it's amazing what shifted for me. I had conversations with people that I will stand next to in a class that I never talked to, and I found out they were musicians and they played the French horn, and where they were traveling. It's like from this simple, I'm going to be in my point of origin. It's like my whole engagement at the Y was completely different.
That's gorgeous.
It's amazing. I mean, the practices and these activating principles they work.
Yeah.
They absolutely work.
And that oneness that is reliably found because you know where to come from and that you have another willing partner. I mean, if the other person isn't there, you can't really go there as easily. So I think from a love standpoint, learning how to go there, and to also, the other thing is people are starving. Starving.
Yeah.
We're so alone.
Yeah. Yes.
And even if you have a million friends, you know, you're just so used to being separate and being alone and being on your own. And, you know, and so when you start to do this practice, you start to get nourished, you know, you start to feel that sense of connectedness and nourishment. And I think it's easier to attract someone and then begin to be able to bring them in because you actually know what you're doing. You know, you're actually like capable.
Yes.
Otherwise, you have two blind people that don't know what they're doing. I mean, Peter and I lived inside that consciousness together for 4 years before he died. And unbelievable. I mean, it was a never-ending experience of being inside each other. And then something was being given to us that was so, it was so beautiful. I mean, there was like, I just thought of it right now, but one time, you know, we were together in New York City and we'd made love, and it was almost like we went somewhere that was so beautiful. I don't know. It was like somewhere in some other world that I almost couldn't breathe.
Wow. Wow.
And the love that was pouring through us was just like, it was so beautiful. I remember he said, okay, let's go walk outside, you know, let's go get something. And we're walking around the streets and I'm kind of in this like luminous altered state. And I felt like taking people and going, do you have any idea? Like, oh my God. I was like the aliens had taken me somewhere that was so gorgeous and they just dropped me down. And I was like, do you understand?
Yeah. Well, you can feel the power, and Patricia, it must have been powerful because you actually took that experience between the two of you and you laid out this whole program basically.
Yeah, it's true.
From being in that experience.
How to get on the spaceship.
It's really amazing. And I love what you're saying too about, you know, like, everybody may not be, you know, in that space with you, but it's like everyone talks about the law of attraction now, you know, it's like a big deal. But the truth is that when you're in this space, they do come. It's like they're there.
You have that as a possibility. Plus, we have each other. We have a global community where every day you can get on. You can like be with other people, be with other people, be with other people. You're never hungry again. Do you know what I mean? Like that love and the divinity part of it is changing you and opening you and taking you and making you more sensitive and more available and richer. Like I did a practice yesterday with this beautiful man, you know, who I knew who was an author. You know, we'd interviewed each other and then he got interested in this and now he's on the global community. We did a practice and he was so generous. I could feel his energy just pouring through me nonstop. And we were just like, it was like with Peter, like we were just laughing and the fullness and like where we went and what we were being shown and what felt like almost like we were being changed. It was just exquisite. You know, like human beings. I mean, the part that I'm excited about is obviously the relationship part is great. And I'm a big believer I'm a romantic of the highest order. But for me, the fact that it's the time for the multiple beloveds, you know, it's time for the many to enter into a consciousness together at this fundamental base. I believe that when people go to do business consulting or they go work in government, when this becomes normal and possible, like meditation, right? So the mutual awakening is like a 21st century practice. You know, mindfulness is now normal. Everybody does mindfulness, right? So, you know, and that was not true 30 years ago, even 40 years, you know, or
not
20.
At all.
So when that becomes normal, we will connect. We will have people in the government that are connecting at the deepest level of who they are, beyond political, beyond anything. You don't know anything about them. You're connecting in the deepest place where we actually become one. And from that oneness and sense of recognition of seeing who's there and vice versa, and feeling that larger connectivity, then you can move up and go, okay, now what? Now what are our differences? What do we need? What do you need? What do I need? Oh, we're losing it again. We're going really separate. Boom, go back. Then deal with it. Go back. Because even in a marriage, like, you can't deal with anything if you're in total separation.
You actually have an example of a couple in your book that were having struggles in their marriage.
Yeah, totally.
And they did a 15-minute, after months of couples counseling and all of this angst, they did a 15-minute practice, and they were both like, oh, this is what we always needed.
Yeah.
Now I have all.
Well, they remembered, like when you get really separate from the people that you love, and you're like, yeah, but and you didn't, and then, like all that stuff, and you can't see them anymore.
Yeah.
You don't remember. And you go under together in this, and you're like, oh, there you are. Oh, I remember. I like you. It's like you forget because you get all this
back. You're coming back
right.
to really who you are, and you're getting out of the ego.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, there you are. I remember why I'm in all this trouble with you.
The other thing that you talked about that I loved, and I've never heard it put quite like this, is what is the shape of your relationship. And you talked about the asymmetry and the symmetry, and I thought that was such a gorgeous way. Instead of saying, well, you don't do this as well as I do, and you can't do that, but I can, you put it in a way where it's about capacities and mutual influence. That was the activating principle, right? The mutual influence.
Absolutely. And the flow back and forth, instead of competing or feeling ashamed or proving that you're something that you're not, all of those ego, wrestling matches that we get into. Yeah. It was amazing. That was another thing that Peter was so beautiful at, because I was, I'm pretty powerful female type, and I'd had a lot of power in what I had done before I met him. And he's like this mystic. Not worldly at all, right? Could barely find his way around Bloomingdale's. It was like, he was just like, what am I doing here? And even though he was gorgeous, but he was just like, he was like suspicious of places like that. And so we have these two opposites, right? And he knew that I had this worldly, a certain kind of capacity, and he loved it. And he was so masterful in the domain of male, female. Like, I felt like I was with Dionysus himself. He just like knew everything. And I could totally surrender and just be like, show me, guide me, take me.
Yeah, that's such.
And there was no war. It was a joy, because I learned so much from him. I could be so vulnerable and follow. And then where I happened to be brilliant, he wasn't going, well, blah, blah. It was like, wow, he just thought it was cool.
You were influencing each other.
Yeah.
I just love the way that's put, so just.
And celebrating.
Yeah, and celebrating. And
each other's gifts.
And even seeing where you may want to grow, like maybe there's places where you can grow.
Well, I learned, he learned a lot from me. I know he did, but I was more aware of what I learned from him. And he was so good at seducing people. Like, everybody, he was just charming, and everybody would and I was a little mad at him. I just thought, and I started judging how he was, and, I was having a whole thing. And then finally I went, I better cut this out. I said, I'm going to learn that. I'm going to get that. You know what I mean? And then I started being with him so I could capture that ability in myself.
I love that.
It was fun.
Give us a little bit more on what really an evolutionary relationship is, and how we could have that in our love relationships. Like, what could we do to integrate some of these activating principles to be in an evolutionary relationship with our lovers, or even people we're dating and we want to have connections with?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to do a little bit of research, read the book or something, find out what are we really talking about here? Yeah. So you have if you want to create anything, you have to spend some time to get clear. So the distinction what's the possibility that that is? Like I'm talking about it and somebody might go, ooh, that sounds kind of good, but oh, I don't think I could have it or whatever. You know, you have to like give yourself a chance to kind of, what is she talking about? What is this possibility of something that's sounds almost like it's impossible, but I really like it. You know, like I really think,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and then give the reality, find out what are the qualities, what are the distinctions, like how is that, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does that taste like? What could it be like to have that?
Yeah.
So you really grok what it is.
It
This
is very
divine connection.
experiential. It's not something that we can intellectualize. And you have
No.
a beautiful page, or like a web page. It's called Bonuses for Your Book, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
So,
can go on there.
yeah, that's a beautiful place to start, because it has
Yeah.
just some very basic, like what is point of origin, and it's a recording, and you have a little
Yeah.
recording of doing a practice. Like Patricia will guide you through a practice. So that's
Yeah.
all in Bonuses.
But I mean, given how important a relationship is, do some homework.
Mhm. Yeah.
Don't just unconsciously pick what your mother picked or your father picked. Like find out what is really possible and why it's important now, why it would actually be important, not just for you, but it's important for the world to move beyond this sort of normal egoic level of relating to one another.
Right.
So that's number one.
Yes.
So you got to see what's possible and kind of see yourself in it and, you know, kind of go, okay. And then realize too what it costs. Everything costs something. So the cost of having that kind of love and that kind of beauty is that you will have to really grow, and you'll have to learn how to tolerate that much love and that much beauty. And that's not simple.
No. No.
You know, if you don't really care if they leave, it doesn't matter, right? But if it's exquisite, if it's the most beautiful thing, like there's this, you're living with this kind of preciousness. It's like when you have a child, you're scared for the rest of your life. You know, like you have a child, like if anything happens to them, you know you're not okay as a parent. And that's part of the price of real love.
So really what you're saying is, you know, that you have to be out of the superficial kind of conditioned parts of relationships, and you have to long for the depth and the beauty and the truth of what an evolutionary relationship is. You have to really long for it first.
And the particularity of yours. Because they're not, you know, it isn't like, you know, wife upgrading. You know, you can't just, you can't just like trade them in for another one. I mean, it's literally, if you ready yourself for this and then attract it, it's so particular. It's the unget-overable. You're unget-overable, and so are they. And so there's this also sense that nobody can take them away because they're yours. The other piece is, if they're also curious, I would recommend that if they go to my website, you know, evolutionarycollective.com, they just scroll down. There's a thing that start here. You know, if you're interested, they can download part 1 of the book.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
So they just hit this button. It says starter kit, and they sign up, and they get the first 4 chapters, including the extra information about longing and desire, goes with the first chapter. There's an extra piece with an exercise that they can actually work with. So they will immediately kind of stir up that whole longing different than desire, just what I want.
Yeah.
And from there, you know, if they get more curious, they can learn how to do the practice with us. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a very simple thing to learn. You know, there's like a 4-session course. Everybody's been able to learn so far, and there are people.
Even me.
Even you, right? No, even me. Yeah, it's kind of like there's a way. So if people are curious, they're also welcomed into a community of people that are practicing in this way, just like joining a yoga studio or something. But developing that can't hurt, you know, like, I mean, it's like, can't hurt as far as like, if you're serious about the consciousness and the availability and the sense of what it would take to have an exquisite relationship that is also in the world, but is exquisite, well, then you got to like get some muscles.
Yes.
You got to get some core strength. You got to get a little core strength there.
It's a way, this is a way to get ready for love.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had couples do this, or if you're in
either if you're dating
a relationship, first thing you could ever do, smartest thing, get your husband or your partner or your lover to come and do the, you know, do the course together. You will have the best sex you've ever had. I mean, it's like, I mean, literally, it is amazing how it builds a bridge underneath in a way that you start to experience, knowing how to like lean into that place and be there. And also in intimacy, there's a kind of consciousness where you feel like you can get inside everything. Like you can feel things from the inside. I can't imagine. I mean, what would be exciting is that the people that listen to this, because I know how much we love.
Yeah.
And love the divine and would want like everyone in the world to have like the greatest possible experience of epic love.
Absolutely. Yes.
In service to the world.
In service.
And, you know, if they're remotely curious, they should definitely go and check out the evolutionarycollective.com and just see if what we're talking about makes any sense to them. Because if it's not on the menu, you can't order it.
That's why finding out more about this and these practices and these activating principles and bringing them into your life is
everything. It's everything.
It is everything.
And we're trying to, you know, you and I are putting something on the menu so they can see the reality and the possibility of something that is innate for us. And you don't have to be, you know, have all your wounds healed and all this other stuff. I mean, Peter and I were as crazy as anybody else. You know, I mean, it's not, you know, I don't see it that way. I don't see like you have to be a perfectly healthy human being in all ways in order to have this kind of relationship, because the wounds get burned off through love.
Yeah.
So it isn't like do this first and then this. You can have a very sane relationship that is not this.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Yeah, but to know what the possibilities and the potentials are.
You know, that mystical dimension and the oneness and the beauty is something you have to want.
Yes, and hopefully
it doesn't just happen.
We have inspired people
hopefully
through this conversation to want it and learn and discover.
That's right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah. So
thank you
so
I know.
much. It's beautiful.
Thank
so
you.
good to be with you. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.